First contact is always a tense event. Usually at least one species involved was new to space travel and had yet to meet anyone, and so they were naturally anxious about what they'd encounter. Even the best handled encounters facilitated by mutual acquaintances typically had their share of awkwardness, as cultural quirks were figured out and translator AI got to grips with linguistic oddities. I always found it hilarious that the Tishan-Lockwood contact went as well as it did, despite the translator AI taking a full week to piece together Lokori analogies. Still, there was a typical rhythm to these things, so much so that every species has handbooks on how to handle them. There was nothing of the sort to be handed out when the first ship sporting the 12-pointed star appeared. I was in Pesh, the capital of Vichy Free, on that day. I'd been helping my flock in the mines. I wasn't quite old enough to do the hard labour, but I'd been running food and water for the workers so they wouldn't have to come up the battered old lifts or worry about damaging precious drones. My mother had decided to treat the fellows to Neshka sausage and corp juice. The smell sends me back to that day every time I catch it. I still had rock over my head when the earthquake hit. I was lucky in that I'd already been running. My cousin and best friend, Seishi, was only about 5 meters behind me, and she didn't make it out. Not that I was unscathed. A tumbling rock broke my leg on the way out. They say it was the third largest earthquake encountered in recorded history. Sure seemed like the largest at the time. Almost every entrance collapsed, half the buildings in town toppled, and the other half cracked like an egg. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, our main power plant went critical, blowing apart the entire central city block. In the span of about a minute, the gleaming colony that had been my entire world was reduced to rubble, while nearly everyone I knew and loved was buried under a mountain. With the power out, we had no way of calling for help. The next shipment wouldn't be expected for another 3 days, and the nearest settlement was a scientific outpost on an outlying island. Nobody was coming for us. I thought I'd lost everyone I knew and loved. Then we first heard that distinctive sizzling snarl of their engines, and the first of their craft came into view. It was a huge, industrial-looking machine, like a dump truck with wings, except for its sky blue and red colouring, and the 12-pointed star with a missing 13th spoke, predominantly displayed on its wings. There was no communication, no statement of intent, no indication of who they were. Without so much as a hello, towering bipedal creatures in snow-white spacesuits dropped down en masse into the city and spread into the ruins. I'd like to say I welcomed them with open arms, but let's be honest, I assumed they were raiders. But when one found me cowering among the rocks, they spoke for a remarkably soft translator. "It's safe to come out, child. I'm a friend. You look hurt. Can I help you?" What followed was a whirlwind, as I was whisked away to a triage tent, the alien easily carrying me in their arms while a stream of the huge, heavy transports came pouring into the area. I was barely aware of it, but outside the city and mountainside was ripped apart as the newcomers tore the ruins apart looking for survivors. My triage tent filled within minutes, and I could hear dozens more being put together outside in record time. I'm told that about 17,000 people died in the earthquake, most of them in the reactor blast. I guarantee that if it weren't for the actions of the aliens, it would have been thrice that. I myself only lost an uncle. Says she even survived despite some grievous injuries, and made a full recovery with the aliens' aid. Within the day, everyone was accounted for. For comparison, the first aid ship didn't arrive until 5 days later, and most of us would have been dead. The remarkable thing, though, wasn't just that they arrived on the scene so quickly or were so efficient in their rescue efforts, but once they'd finished tending to the wounded and counting the dead, that was when the real work began. They found a more stable spit of land nearby, set us up with some temporary lodgings, and then started the single fastest city construction I've ever seen. The number of these aliens that came down to help outnumbered us 10 to 1, but by the time the first building started to rise, we were unafraid. The moment I could walk, I was at their side, helping build where I could, and more often bringing them refreshments as they and their machines did the heavy lifting. High above, asteroids were being towed into orbit to be taken apart by a massive mobile refinery, easily as big as my species' largest warship. Within a month, Pesh had risen again. It wasn't the same city. Nobody and nothing could endure this sort of trouble without its scars or changes. The aliens didn't bother mimicking our architecture. It might as well have been one of their cities that they dropped down for us. None of us minded, though. The technology was roughly equivalent to ours, but higher quality. They printed everything in our tongue, and they made damn sure to put in failsafes against future tectonic activity, most of which I don't truly understand. Then, after a small festival where we showered them with our thanks, they piled into their ships and left, never to be seen again. When I started communicating with my distant friends, they all called me a liar when I told them the story, at least until I showed them the footage. After all, there were so many mysteries about this. Nobody in Tishan space had seen these aliens before. Where did they come from? How did they already know our language? How could such a massive army of them appear out of nowhere and vanish just as quickly? Why would they pour themselves into such a massive aid project for people they didn't know? When I headed to my university and shared my story, it turned out that Pesh was far from the first to encounter them. Across the known galaxy, many species reported the 12-pointed star, always in the same scenario. Some mass casualty event ripped through a population, and within days, if not hours, an army of the 12th star came to help. Sometimes they were even the species' first contact. A few had seen their faces and confirmed them to be some sort of larger mammalian species with stone-coloured skin and peculiar tufts of hair instead of hair, but beyond that they were a complete enigma. They were advanced, seemingly benevolent, and apparently everywhere yet nowhere at the same time. Those of us who had experienced the 12th star endeavoured to emulate their work in our respective fields. I personally went into crisis management and worked with my then future mate to create the Minuteman emergency training. Today, every Tishan from adolescence on is given the tools they need to respond to a disaster, with regular refresher courses to keep them sharp. I didn't know if that was how the 12th star handled their training, but it was the best I could think of, and so far it's proven its worth. That seemed to be the recurring theme in other fields: emulation. Nobody could quite figure out how they did certain things, especially the stealth of their starships, but the pursuit of their feats made us better, and not just technologically. One of my favourite video clips ever was during the intense Cheska Nebula incident, where the Orderloi and Nezca thought that the other had stolen each other's technology, and were sending spies by the truckload to uncover who had leaked where. Then, during a heated negotiation, one of the Nezca commented, "Why should we apologise for what the 12-pointed folk gave us?" At which point the Odaloi ambassador stopped in his tracks, got this huge sparkle in his eyes, and went, "Wait, you don't mean the Vanishing Heroes?" "Of course, my mother's space station was saved from deorbiting by them." "My nephew's ship was rescued by them." At which point the negotiation basically instantly cooled, and they mutually agreed that their saviours would be ashamed of how they were acting. Of course, the exploration community couldn't leave well enough alone. They needed to know who the 12th star were. There was some idea, or perhaps fantasy, that these sweet, benevolent creatures would be able to form a lasting peace between all species. That if two had encountered the 12th star, that alone was the starting point to build something greater. Even today I see their banner used as a symbol of peace and interspecies unity. I know none of us expected what we'd find of their homeworld. My dear cousin, Setchi, was on that ship that found it, and I think her words say it best. We arrived in a hollow system. There was no asteroid belt, no moons around the gas giants, no Kuiper belt. There was this one phenomenon we'd never seen before, a cloud of gas like a miniature nebula on a decaying orbit. We would later realise it was the remnants of a giant whose core was stripped out. As we picked for the ruins, like coroners on a corpse struggling to determine its cause of death, we detected a signal from the third world. What we found was a green world, but one ravaged with radiation and acidity. Life still desperately clung on, nestled into the ruins of megacities, but any hope of civilization surviving there was gone. All that remained were the few species that simply refused to die, despite the crippling environment. High over the world, 6 satellites in geosynchronous repeated a message. It took the end of our world, but we have learned our lesson. We cannot fix our mistakes, so we accept exile until we can. In that moment I knew something. Perhaps not why these people were so advanced or what motivated them to be so helpful, but I knew that the reason they kept hidden was that they felt unworthy of being seen, of joining the interstellar community properly. However, with the permission of my captain, I left them a message on my own. People of the 12th Star, you may not be able to fix your mistake, but your efforts to learn have made you the best of us. We cannot give you your home, but we are all in agreement that you are welcome in ours.